Welcome to my channel, The Binge Eating Therapist. I'm Sarah, former binge eater turned psychotherapist, and my mission is to use this space to bring content to you that will help you to understand your struggle with food and break free from binge eating. And today I want to talk to you about hope, because I think hope is possibly one of the most important things when it comes to binge eating recovery. Like, hope keeps us moving forward. Hope helps us get back on our feet when we feel like we've been knocked off them. And hope is a really important part of change. But when we break it down, like, what is hope? And actually, I think hope is a lot of things. When I was thinking about it, I was thinking how hope is a belief to begin with. It's a belief that things can and will get better, that things can change, that you're not always going to feel like this. And hope is also a feeling. We talk about feeling hopeful. So it's something that we experience in our bodies. But also, we talk about having hope. And we don't really do that with any other feelings. We don't talk about having anger or having sadness. So it's almost like it's a possession or a noun. It's something that we possess and carry within us. And when I think of my own journey, there were times when I felt like I had no hope, that things were never going to get better. But hope always returned. And so I wonder whether it was always there and that I just felt out of touch with it. So you might think that you don't have any hope, but I would argue that the fact you're even watching this video suggests that there's some hope that what I'm going to say might make things a little bit better. If you had no hope, you wouldn't give a toss what me or anyone else had to say about binge eating, because you would see yourself as a hopeless case. So I think it's okay to not feel hopeful sometimes, but I think it's important to try and bring ourselves back to hope, because hope, because it's a feeling, it has an energy in the body, and because it's a belief, it has an impact on the mind. So it kind of connects those two and creates a positive state, or at least a state of feeling better than when you don't have it. So I was thinking about hope and that idea of, how do we get more hope, or how do we get back in touch with hope? So I came up with 5 reasons to feel hopeful that binge eating recovery is possible for you. And the first reason to be hopeful is that human beings, that's you, I'm assuming you're one of those, human beings are capable of changing and learning. And we know that. You can look at your life, you can look at anybody else's life, and you know that we are capable of absorbing new information, figuring out what that means to us, and moving forward and taking action. We may not always be feeling particularly capable of even feeling like taking action, but the fact is that we all have the capacity to learn and change. We might do it differently, we might do it at different rates, but the capacity is there. So you may think that nothing's ever going to change and you're stuck, but you can change. The problem is that with the binge eating all or nothing mentality is that we want that change to kind of happen overnight. We want to just decide to be different. And that just doesn't work for a lot of people, but we are capable of changing, particularly in light of new information and new experiences. And the second reason to be hopeful is that there are some really great resources and help out there. If you look back 30 years ago, podcasts I don't think were a thing then. Instagram certainly didn't exist. And whilst, Instagram does cause a few problems as well, particularly around body image, it can also help when you're following the right accounts. And so there are so many more books and podcasts, and even finding a therapist that knows about binge eating is easier than it would have been 30 years ago, because you can search on Google, you can put your keywords in. So we live in this world of information and information sharing. The fact that YouTube exists and there are hundreds, thousands, I don't know how many, lots of videos about binge eating, and some of them are really good. And so when you're feeling lost or when you're feeling hopeless, to look to other resources out there to try and find some hope again and to get back on your feet, I think can be really helpful. And the third reason to be hopeful is that it's never been easier to connect with people who know what you're going through. So I think information and technology has been kind of criticised about making us less connected. And maybe like in some areas, particularly in terms of physical contact, that might be true. But really we can connect to people all over the world. You know, a decade or two ago, if you were struggling with binge eating and you didn't come across anybody else who was struggling with binge eating, you might really feel like you were the only one. And I know that in the moment it still does feel like you're the only one. But sometimes when you look out there and you see other people who are experiencing the same thing, and it's so much easier to have compassion for someone else that's doing the same thing that you are. So I think that can really help with shame, is to connect and see that other people are also struggling with binge eating. And again, if you look at the videos on YouTube and you look at how many hits some of them have got, you know, tens, hundreds of thousands, some of them as well. That's how many people are clicking on videos about binge eating. So I think it's a way of feeling less alone, and I think it's a way of feeling less broken, to know that this is more common than you may realise. And binge eating disorder is the most common eating disorder. It's more common than anorexia and bulimia. So now we live in this time where we can seek out other people who might be on the same path as us, so that we don't have to walk this journey completely alone. And the fourth reason to be hopeful kind of follows on from the last one a little bit, but that we are able to see that people have done it. You know, people have struggled with binge eating, been in a really dark place with food, and come out of it to a place where they feel much more peaceful, re-engaged with life, and changed. So I think it's a tricky one, because it's easy then to start comparing your recovery to someone else's recovery. And actually one of the things that I find really quite patronising is when people who've recovered from binge eating say, well, if I can recover, anyone can recover. I can remember that I used to read that when I was struggling and think, you don't have a clue what I go through. I'm really broken. Okay, you might have recovered, but the reason you recovered is because you didn't struggle for as long as me, or you didn't have as big a weight changes as I did, like for whatever reason it might be. So I think, but I can also, at the same time as that, I can have some understanding for the people who say this, because when I used to read someone else saying, if I can recover, anyone can recover, that used to just annoy me, because I didn't believe that. I believed that I was worse. But I also thought at that time that if I could recover, then anybody could recover. I hope that makes sense. So I would see someone else saying it and say that's not true, but in my mind, if I can recover, anyone else can recover. Because I think there's this idea that we see ourselves as the worst binge eater out there. There's always a reason why our binge eating is so much worse than somebody else's. But I think coming through it, and particularly for me working with other people, when I see how different people's circumstances are, I would never profess that now. I would never say, just because I can recover, you can recover. That is not the reason why. But if you look around and you see that other people have recovered, or even if they've got into a better place than they were before, this idea of recovery is just, it means so many different things to different people. There's a lot of people in their mind, a lot of people struggling with binge eating, they think recovery means eating perfectly and being thin. But actually, you know, I've said this before, and I'll just throw it in this video as well, because it's just the way I see recovery. For me, how I define recovery is not saying no to food because you can't say yes, because that's diet mentality. You're not allowed it. But it's also not saying yes to food because you can't say no. That's the binge eating out of control mentality. So for me, it's really about feeling like you have a sense of freedom and choice. That's how I see recovery. But everyone gets to define it however they want to. But yeah, going off track a little bit. And the fifth and final reason to be hopeful is that life doesn't stay the same. It's not static. Life moves forward and you move forward to some degree, whether you like it or not. And one of my favourite quotes, I think I've posted it a couple of times, and for me it just really resonates. I love it. It's a C.S. Lewis quote, and it goes, "Isn't it funny how day by day nothing changes, and then you look back and everything is different. And I think that's often the case. Again, those overnight changes look so seductive, and we think that we should be able to change ourselves through will alone. But I think that hope is what nudges us forward. Hope is what gets us back on track when we feel like we've lost our way again. And when we keep bringing ourselves back to hope, we keep inching forward. And day by day, it won't feel like much is happening. But when you've had like a few months or however long of prioritizing hope and bringing yourself back, then you'll know what it's like to look back and see how everything's different. I mean, you can probably see that anyway in your life, depending on what's going on in your life. If you look back to where you were a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, how was life different and how were you different? So this idea, the hopelessness feels like nothing will change, but life does change and it does move forward. And if we get our intention in the right place, we're just focusing in the right direction, when we start moving forward, we're going to start moving forward in the right direction. And by right direction, I just mean a good direction. Again, bringing us back to hope being the belief that things can and will get better. So, wishing you hope and peace. See you on the next video.